Hello everyone, thank you for taking some time to view this presentation. Today we'll be talking about the basic terms, definitions, and the most basic accounting for bonds. More complicated topics will be covered in another video. So let's start by asking the very first question, what is a bond? And a bond is defined as a contractual agreement between two parties. The first of those parties is the issuer of the bond. And as you can see here, the bond will create a liability for the issuer. So for the issuer of the bond is a liability. The issuer issues the bond to the bondholder, the other party. And for the bondholder, this bond is going to be a receivable. So to picture this transaction, we have the issuer over here, and we have the bondholder here. The bondholder will actually send some funds to the issuer. The bondholder is going to pay the issuer for the issuing of the bond. So for this contract, that's really what the bondholder is paying. So we can say, or we can safely assume, that inside of this contract, there must be something of some value. Let's take a look at it. So in the contract, what do we have? We have different terms, the first of which is the maturity value, otherwise known as the principal par or face value. And you need to be familiar with all of those terms. This is defined as the amount, I'll start again. This is the amount that the issuer must pay back to the bondholder. Next, we have the maturity date, and the maturity date is defined as the date when the issuer must pay the maturity value to the bondholder. Finally, we have the coupon rate, otherwise known as the contract rate or the stated rate. This is a rate of interest. And this rate is expressed annually. Okay, and the bondholder is expected to pay, is going to receive this amount from the issuer. It is usually paid semi-annually or quarterly. So let's take a look at how the money flows. Once again, we'll start our drawing here where we have an issuer and a bondholder. The bondholder is going to start the transaction by paying the issuer. And in return, the issuer is going to issue a contract, right? This contract here. And in that contract, we have all of those terms we just spoke about. What does that look like if we put things on a timeline? Let's say this is a 5-year bond. Create a timeline here. Let's try to make 5 years in this. Let's say this is year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and then over here at the end, that's year 5. If it's paid semi-annually, that means twice a year, so we should make a mark in the middle of each year here. Where does the money go and at what time? So at the beginning, the bondholder is paying the issuer. Let's say that that is done at a value equal to par. Okay, so $1 million bond, over here, that would mean that when time is equal to 0, or on the issue date, okay, the issuer receives $1 million from the bondholder. Now, it's a 5% semi-annual bond. And the issuer is obligated to pay the bondholder the maturity value at the end on the maturity date, and is also obligated to pay the semi-annual interest. So let's calculate the interest. It says it's a 5% bond. So interest can be calculated like this. We can say 1 million multiplied by 5% is 50,000, but we have to remember to divide it by 2 because this bond is paid semi-annually. This will equal 25,000, and 25,000 will be paid out each semi-annual period. So I've drawn out all of the payments there for interest. There's also the final payment that we cannot forget, and the final payment is a payment for the maturity value. And the maturity value, remember, was $1 million, and that maturity value gets paid out from the issuer to the bondholder at the very end. So here there will be another payment with the interest, and that will be for maturity. So down here, all of these payments are flowing from the issuer to the bondholder. So we looked at all of the amounts that the issuer is paying, but what about the initial amount that the bondholder sends or pays to the issuer? Okay, bond prices are expressed as a percentage of the maturity value. So basic bond prices are listed as follows. A bond price that is quoted at 100 basically means it is being issued for an amount that is equal to the maturity value. Recall that the maturity value can also be referred to as the principal value, the par value, or the face value of the bond. The bonds can also be issued for an amount greater than 100, so there's the greater than sign. So let's say 101, 102, 103, anything over and above 100. And that would be referred to as a premium, which is an amount greater than the maturity value. So remember, these are percentages, even though the way they're spoken about, they drop the percentage sign. There's no percentage sign there. So the last one on this list, and the least by amount, would be when a bond is issued for a discount, which is an amount less than the maturity value. So there's the less than sign there. Numerical examples I find always tend to help. So let's look at one now. Let's say we have $1 million bond, which is issued at first we'll say at 100 or at par. What would the issue price be? We could calculate the issue price by taking the face value, which is $1 million, and multiplying that by 100% or by 1, which equals 1 million. If the bond is issued for a premium, for example, I have written there 108, which is an amount greater than $1 million, or than 100, that would translate to an amount being issued for more than $1 million. So the math behind it would be 1 million multiplied by 108% or 1.08, which would equal $1,080,000. Okay, the last scenario here is, what if the bond was issued at a price of 93? Again, that means 93% of the maturity value. That would equal 1 million multiplied by 93%, and that would equal $930,000. So if these bonds can be issued at different prices, what price is an investor willing to pay? Frankly, an investor will pay the market price for the bond. And the market price is going to be determined by a few factors. The first such factor is the coupon rate. Remember, that can also be called the contract or the stated rate. And we'll define that again as the rate which is expressed annually that the issuer will pay the bondholder. We introduce another rate here called the market rate, also known as the effective rate. This is the rate that is the prevailing rate in the market that the bondholder could get by investing somewhere else in another investment. There's one other item that actually does affect what the market price for the bond will be, and I don't seem to have it on this slide, so I'll just write it into this spot here. And that would be the frequency of payments. In other words, how often is the bondholder going to be paid interest by the issuer? So will it be quarterly, semi-annually, or annually? Now on the previous slide, we discussed how the coupon rate and the market rate affect the price of the bond. But how did they do it? I mean, are we going to have a premium, a discount, or will the bond be issued at par? We can take a look at some theory to help us determine at which rate the bond will be issued at. What we need to do is compare the contract rate to the market rate. And I'll do this with an example. So let's say the contract rate is 5%. If the contract rate is 5% and the market rate is 5%, an investor is no better off investing in this bond or in the market than they would be in the bond. So what you would have is a situation where this bond, as far as the market pricing goes, with everything else being equal in the market, this bond would be issued at par. Sorry about that. Try this again. There, this bond will be issued at par. Now let's say that this bond, same bond, issued at 5%. That's the contract rate, but the market rate has gone up. Let's say the market rate is up to 6% now. Well, now we have a situation where the investor, the bondholder, is better off investing anywhere else in the market. So why would they want to buy this particular bond? And the only way they would want to buy it is if they were able to get it at a discount. And finally, let's say the market rate was to drop. Say the market rate went down to 4%. Now this bond would look quite attractive to any investor because this bond is paying more than the market rate. But the issuing company would now expect to get a bit more for it. They would look for a premium, an amount over and above maturity for this particular bond. So now we'll look at some basic journal entries for a bond that is issued at par. So we have an example here. We have $1 million 5% semi-annual bond, and it is issued on January 1st, 2015. Interest payment dates are June 30th and December 31st. Let's look at some of the basic journal entries for such a transaction. Okay, what's happening here? The first thing that happens is the bondholder and the issuer engage in a transaction, and the bondholder is going to issue funds or spend in order to attain this contract. So right here, this thing at the beginning, that first amount of cash we see is flowing from the bondholder to the issuer. So that means the issuer is getting cash. So let's see what that entry looks like. On January 1st, from the point of view of the issuer is going to debit cash, and the bonds are issued at par, so debit cash for $1 million, and they will credit bonds payable for $1 million. Let's take a look at the entry for the first interest payment. The first interest payment occurs on June 30th. Okay, so recall this is now when the funds are flowing from the issuer to the bondholder. So that means we'll have a credit to cash, as cash is outflowing from the point of view of the issuer. We have cash going from the issuer to the bondholder. So we know we'll have a credit to cash. What will the debit be? Well, they're interest payments, so it should stand to reason that the debit is to interest expense. Again, how do we calculate the amount? Well, the interest is a percentage of the maturity value. The maturity value is $1 million. We'll multiply that by 5%, but we have to remember this is semi-annual. So divide it by 2, and we get $25,000. So we'll debit interest expense $25,000 and credit cash $25,000. Okay, so there's a look at some of the basics of bonds, and that concludes this first video. The more complex topics we will cover in subsequent videos. Thanks again for your time. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful.